You don't experience reality directly. What you experience is a version of reality constructed inside your mind. It feels immediate, accurate, and trustworthy. But that feeling is not evidence. It's a sensation. And sensations can be wrong. The unsettling part is not that your mind can misinterpret things occasionally. It's that it is constantly interpreting, filtering, and reshaping information without asking for your permission. You don't notice this because the process is seamless. There is no gap between perception and belief. What you see feels true the moment you see it. That instant certainty is what makes the system convincing. Not because it's reliable, but because it never shows you its uncertainty. You move through life assuming your thoughts are a direct reflection of reality. If something feels obvious, you trust it. If something feels wrong, you avoid it. This creates an invisible rule. Clarity equals truth. But clarity is just a feeling your brain produces when it has settled on an interpretation. It doesn't mean the interpretation is accurate. It means your mind has stopped questioning it. The danger here is subtle. You don't question your thoughts because they arrive already finished. There is no visible construction process. So you assume there wasn't one. But every thought you have is assembled, not discovered. Think about how quickly you form opinions. You meet someone, and within seconds you know what they're like. You hear a tone of voice and decide what it means. You recall a memory and feel sure it happened exactly that way. These aren't careful conclusions. They're immediate impressions that feel complete. What you're experiencing is not knowledge, it's compression. Your brain takes limited information and fills in the rest. The result feels whole, but it's built on fragments. And because it feels whole, you rarely go back to check what was missing. When you feel certain, there's a physical quality to it, a sense of stability, a lack of tension. Your mind settles. That feeling becomes a signal you trust. But that signal is not tied to accuracy. It's tied to efficiency. Your brain prefers fast conclusions over slow analysis because speed conserves energy, so it rewards quick judgments with a feeling of confidence. That confidence is not proof. It's reinforcement. It trains you to accept the first explanation that feels coherent, even if it's incomplete or distorted. You assume you are seeing things as they are, but perception is not passive. It is an active construction. Your brain is constantly predicting what it expects to see and then adjusting based on incoming data. This means you're not starting from zero. You're starting from expectation, and expectation shapes perception. Two people can look at the same situation and see entirely different things, not because one is lying, but because both are interpreting through different internal models. What you call what happened is often just what your mind predicted would happen. Memories feel like stored recordings. You revisit them and assume you're accessing something fixed. But memory is not retrieval. It's reconstruction. Each time you recall something, your brain rebuilds it using fragments and context. That reconstruction is influenced by your current beliefs, emotions, and expectations. So your past is not stable. It shifts quietly over time. And because each version feels familiar, you trust it. This creates a false continuity. You believe your past confirms your present thinking, when in reality your present thinking is reshaping your past. Your brain is designed to complete patterns. When it receives partial information, it fills in the gaps automatically. This is useful for survival, but problematic for accuracy. You don't notice missing information because your mind supplies it instantly. This creates the illusion of completeness. You believe you've seen the whole picture when you've only seen a portion. The rest was inferred. And inference feels identical to observation once it's integrated. This is how assumptions become invisible. Every experience is tagged with an emotional tone. That tone influences how you interpret it. If something feels uncomfortable, your mind searches for reasons to justify that feeling. If something feels good, it does the same in the opposite direction. The interpretation follows the emotion, not the other way around. But because the reasoning appears logical, you assume it came first. This reverses cause and effect. You believe you feel something because it's true, when often you believe something is true because you feel it. Your brain relies on shortcuts to function efficiently. These shortcuts reduce complexity by simplifying decisions, but simplification removes nuance. You categorize quickly, generalize broadly, and ignore details that don't fit the pattern. This allows you to act quickly, but it also introduces distortion. The more familiar a situation feels, the more aggressively your brain uses these shortcuts. And familiarity itself can be misleading. Something feels familiar not because it's accurate, but because it resembles something you've seen before. Your mind continuously builds narratives to explain what's happening. These narratives create coherence. They turn scattered events into a story that makes sense. But coherence is not the same as truth. A story can be internally consistent and still be inaccurate. The important detail is this: once a narrative is formed, your mind protects it. New information is filtered through it. Contradictions are minimized or ignored. This creates stability, but it also locks you into a specific interpretation. All of these processes happen automatically and without visibility. You don't see the prediction, the filtering, the reconstruction, or the shortcut. You only see the result, and the result feels immediate. There's no delay that would signal processing. This immediacy creates the illusion that nothing happened between reality and your perception of it. But in that invisible space, your mind has already shaped what you're experiencing. Incorrect thoughts don't feel incorrect. There's no built-in sensation that signals this might be wrong. Instead, incorrect thoughts feel smooth. They integrate easily into your existing beliefs. That smoothness is what makes them convincing. If something fits your current model of the world, your mind accepts it without resistance. And because there's no friction, there's no reason to question it. Doubt only arises when something feels inconsistent, not when something is inaccurate. Once a belief is formed, your attention starts selecting information that supports it. This isn't intentional, it's automatic. You notice what aligns and overlook what doesn't. Over time, this creates a reinforcing loop. Your belief appears to be constantly validated because you're only seeing confirming evidence. This strengthens your confidence, not because the belief is correct, but because the system is biased toward maintaining it. Your mind prefers stability over accuracy. Changing a belief requires effort and introduces uncertainty, so your brain resists it. It interprets ambiguity in ways that preserve your current understanding. This makes your internal world feel consistent, even when it's not aligned with reality. The longer a belief exists, the more stable it becomes. And stability feels like truth, even when it's just familiarity reinforced over time. The shift begins when you stop treating your thoughts as final conclusions and start seeing them as outputs. Instead of asking, Is this true? You begin asking, how did this thought form? This redirects attention from content to process, and once you observe the process, the certainty begins to weaken. Not because the thought disappears, but because it's no longer invisible. When you create even a small gap between perception and belief, something changes. The automatic acceptance slows down. You start noticing alternatives. Other interpretations become possible. This doesn't mean you become uncertain about everything. It means you recognize that certainty is something your mind produces, not something it detects. Confidence stops being a signal of truth and becomes a signal of completion. It tells you your mind has settled, not that it has arrived at the correct answer. This reframing changes how you respond to your own thinking. Instead of trusting confidence, you examine it. You ask what assumptions allowed that confidence to form. Your mind pushes toward closure. It wants answers, conclusions, certainty. But accuracy often requires staying incomplete, holding multiple possibilities without collapsing them into one. This feels uncomfortable because it removes the stability your mind prefers. But that discomfort is not a problem. It's a sign that you're no longer defaulting to the first available explanation. You don't need to eliminate distortion. That's not possible. What changes is your relationship to it. Thoughts become provisional rather than absolute. They are considered, not obeyed. This reduces the influence of automatic interpretations without requiring constant control. The system is still running, but you're no longer fully inside it. Your mind doesn't stop constructing reality. It never will. But once you see that construction, the illusion changes, not because the system disappears, but because it loses its invisibility. And when something is no longer invisible, it can no longer fully convince you that it is the only version of truth. There is a deeper layer to this problem that is easy to miss. Even when you become aware that your mind is constructing interpretations, the construction itself doesn't stop. Awareness does not remove the mechanism. It only changes your visibility of it. This creates a subtle illusion of control. You may start believing that because you can question your thoughts, you are now thinking more accurately. But the questioning process is still happening inside the same system. The same biases, shortcuts, and emotional influences are still active. They don't disappear. They adapt. Your mind can generate more sophisticated explanations that feel more refined, more rational, and therefore more trustworthy. But refinement is not the same as accuracy. It is simply a more complex version of the same process. This is where self-awareness can become misleading. It feels like progress because it introduces reflection, but reflection itself can be shaped by the same distortions it is trying to examine. The result is a layered structure of thinking where each layer feels more deliberate than the last, yet all of them are built on the same underlying mechanisms. This is why simply thinking more does not solve the problem. More thinking does not automatically lead to clearer perception. In many cases, it leads to more convincing interpretations. The system becomes better at explaining itself, not necessarily better at aligning with reality. And because these explanations feel more detailed and internally consistent, they can be even harder to question. The complexity itself becomes a form of reinforcement. You trust the thought not because you verified it, but because it feels too structured to be wrong. This is how the illusion evolves rather than disappears. At this point, the shift is no longer about correcting individual thoughts. It is about recognizing that accuracy is not something your mind naturally prioritizes. What it prioritizes is coherence, efficiency, and stability. These priorities shape every interpretation you experience. So instead of trying to force your mind to be perfectly accurate, the more realistic adjustment is to stop expecting certainty from it at all. This changes the role your thoughts play. They stop being answers and start becoming signals, indicators of how your mind is organizing information in that moment. Some signals are useful, some are distorted, but none of them are final. This removes the pressure to resolve everything immediately. You no longer need to arrive at a single conclusion just to feel stable. That stability was always artificial. It was created by closing uncertainty, not by resolving it. When you allow uncertainty to remain without forcing it into a fixed interpretation, something subtle happens. Your perception becomes less rigid. You begin to notice shifts, inconsistencies, and alternative explanations without needing to collapse them into one narrative. This doesn't make you indecisive. It makes you less dependent on premature certainty. And over time, this changes how convincing your own thoughts feel. They don't lose their presence, but they lose their authority. They become part of the experience, rather than the definition of it. And once that shift stabilizes, the idea that your mind is lying stops feeling like a threat. It becomes a description of how the system works, not something to fix, but something to see clearly enough that it no longer defines the limits of your understanding.